Uh, function. Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone, to Chasing Lullabies and another fantastic evening together. Hello. You're waving. Does that mean that you can hear me? Yeah, okay, amazing. It's so wonderful when Wi-Fi ends and doesn't work. A big mazel tov to Rena for the first of all the move nearer to shul, and second of all for the upcoming wedding of Helen to Andrew, which was going to be on the 29th of December. And actually, I moved my holiday to make it happen on the 29th, and then we moved it to Thursday. So then on Thursday, I moved a session I was going to do with the Bank of what's it called, the London Stock Exchange, and then we got the announcement that actually Matthew Hancock was not happy with their wedding on Thursday. He wanted them to move it to tomorrow, so we have a last-minute wedding tomorrow, which is very, very exciting. And I'm particularly excited to be singing a mashup of "Perfect" by Ed Sheeran and Bowie Kala. That's very exciting for me, and also to be marrying them. So really looking forward to celebrating this wonderful event with you. And then we're all going into tier 3. So mazel tov, and it's so nice to see everyone. Happy Hanukkah, spreading the light at this time, because even though we're going into tier 3 and even though we're in lockdown or whatever it is, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And every day now, I walk past a little sign which gives me a big smile, a big grin on my face, because there's a little sign just on the way to my mental health block in Stevenage, which says COVID vaccination hub this way. So yeah, man, that's really exciting. And we're on the way. Okay, last week, I think, first of all, I was told that last week, possibly too much of a recap. So I'm not going to do the same thing and recap for the first 30 minutes and then not get into any new material. I'll show you what we did last week in 3 minutes. Hello, Lise. Nice kind of candles. I'll show you what we did for 3 minutes last week, and then we're just going to dive straight into that key story that we lit up last week as being something which is really going to be the tipping point for the whole piece. So, this was our mind map that we created last week in order to kind of chart what we've done. I'll just try and put it in big so that you can see it a little bit better. And this mind map tried to show, try to show the different parts of everything that we've covered this time in Chasing Lullabies. So what did we have over here? We had down the left-hand side the 3 creation stories. Each creation story which had 3 elements. 1, creation itself, and an act of creativity that needed a break, needed a Shabbat, or an act that needed some sort of barrier to it. 2, we had tree temptation, something that was a risk to this creation story, a risk to the protagonists, and then we had the Shabbat-like moment. So in Adam's world, God was creating. Creativity that carries on going. That itself is destructive, because it's like the painter that never finishes. Putting paint onto a canvas, at some point it's just going to be a thick mess of acrylic. Instead, there's a point where Shabbat, there needs to be a breaking from creativity in order to give space to the other. The other then sort of almost maybe infatuated with their own creativity, as now the mini creator has a temptation with their own creativity as they individuate and need to come back, and that's the tree temptation. So in Adam's world, that's the tree of knowledge between good and evil, and we talked about that tree. And then in Noah's world, we have the same thing. We have the same pattern. And in Abraham's world, we have the same pattern. In Abraham's world, his blessing of creativity is that he's going to have land, not the whole world, like Adam and Noah, and not all the peoples in the world, not like Adam and Noah, who are going to be the progenitors of all humanity. But Abraham is going to be the father of a nation, a very multitudinous nation. He's going to have the land of Israel. There's a tree temptation. We talked about that when we learned about Hagar. And there's a Shabbat-like moment when it comes to the covenant. So we have these 3 different elements. Now, we have those 3 elements on that side of the dotted line. On the other side of the dotted line, we moved into a new world, Jacob's world. And in Jacob's world, we also found certain recurring events. We had a recurring event of goats and coats. which seem to appear in the Jacob and Esau struggle for the birthright, in the Joseph and brothers, when Joseph, when in last week's Torah portion, Joseph's brothers took the beloved coat, the Technicolor Dreamcoat that Mark Krieger sang a number of the songs in a number of the tunes on Shabbat morning to, and they took the coat and they dipped it in the blood of a goat and they showed to their father. And then we had the goats and coats story of Judah and Tamar, which is also in last week's Torah portion, when Judah is confronted with his daughter-in-law, who he doesn't realize is his daughter-in-law. And rather than paying initially for her fee of a goat, he gives her his coat and his staff and his signet ring as collateral payment. And so we see goats and coats appearing, 3 stories of goats and coats. But actually, we also saw there was a moment in Jacob's life where he could have possibly ended this cycle of repetition, because just as in Goats and Coats 1, there is a crying out. Esau cries out. So too, when Jacob is about to get married to Rachel, Jacob cries out. So it's almost like what goes around comes around, that Jacob caused Esau to cry. So now Esau will cause Jacob to cry. Why will Esau cause Jacob to cry? So we saw that Jacob is kind of attacked on the way to meet his beloved Rachel, and his money is taken away. His money is taken away by Esau's son Eliphaz. And so he comes penniless. And since he comes penniless, that's the sort of the means by which the marriage is lost, because then Laban takes advantage of him. He's tricked into marrying Leah, and there's the whole story and then the descent. Fine. But the question was, well, why does he have to go through all the pain and suffering that he will eventually go through? Why not just say that there's an exit from this issue? There's an exit from this repeated issue, that Jacob and Esau reconcile. There should be an exit. There shouldn't be a Goats and Coats 2. There shouldn't be a Goats and Coats 3. My friends, we're done. Like, you did the good job, Jacob. Pat on the back. You're now Israel. You're now someone who struggles, who faces up to these issues, who is able to look someone face to face, to battle with your own crookedness and to come straight again. And that's the theory that we shared about Jacob, is that he's someone who's not necessarily born altogether just a man of integrity from the very beginning. But no, integrity has to be created, has to be won. And that's what he does. He wins his integrity and he works hard at it. So why is it that we don't have an exit from the story? And the answer is that there's one little episode that jumped in and ruined it all. And that episode is the Teraphim. So that's what Francis suggested to us last week, and that's what we explored at the end of last week's program, that there's this sort of relatively obscure moment of the Teraphim that we will look again inside. And that's when Jacob has decided to leave his father-in-law Laban. He's decided the time has come to go. It's been 20 years that he's been working for him. Finally, he's gone through the different process of obtaining recompense for his time there. And he's leaving with flocks of sheep, and he's living with his wives, and he's living with his children. And Laban runs after him. And one thing that Rachel does, she sneakily just gets involved, just jumps in. And she takes the Teraphim. She takes these divining instruments. These are things which are meant to enable us to enable Laban to tell the future. And because she's taken these things, now why does she want to take them? She wants to take them because if Laban can see the future, maybe he's going to come and he's going to affect the success of the Jacob enterprise. You know, if you've got a crystal ball like Mystic Meg, do you remember her? Do you remember when I did the National Lottery and Mystic Meg had a crystal ball? So is she still? I don't know if she's still around. She's probably shielding from COVID. Anyway, the point is, sorry, that's not an appropriate joke. Anyway, so Mystic Meg has got her crystal ball, and now, or Uncle Laban or Daddy Laban has got his crystal ball, and he's going to be able to tell what Jacob and Corporation is going to do, and that's quite risky. So Rachel takes matters into her own hands, and she steals the Teraphim. And then there's the fateful words where Jacob pronounces a death sentence. And Jacob says, whoever has the Teraphim, they shall die. And unbeknownst to him, it's his wife. And we see that happens. We see that Rachel dies. And we see that actually in the whole story of the Teraphim, we saw at the end of last week's session, there are unbelievable and spooky parallels between the expression of the story of the Teraphim and then the loss of Rachel, the loss of Joseph, and the loss of Benjamin. That all these are held in the Teraphim story. And we gave the example that it describes Rachel as hiding the Teraphim in her saddle pack. What's the word for saddle pack? It's bachar, which if you parse it or verb it differently, it means bachor. She hides the terafim. She hides these divining power fetishes. She hides them in her saddleback, in her bachor, and in her firstborn. And why does she tell her father that she can't get up? She tells her father she can't get up because the derech nashim, the way of ladies, is upon her. She's menstruating. She's her father's going to find if she stands up is a bloody set of rags. What is it that Jacob finds when he's looking for the son of Rachel later on? All he finds is a bloody set of rags after the brothers have dipped the coat in blood. And so we see that, and there are so many different links between the demise of Rachel and the Terafim story. Not just the demise of Rachel, because if you're going to get rid of Rachel, you have to get rid of Joseph. And if you're going to get rid of Rachel, you have to get rid of Benjamin. And we saw those links last time. And therefore, if you were to go and to look back at our screen once again, what the new theory would be is that even though this could have been an exit point, it's not an exit point. And instead, we're going to have three stories that will now recur. Just as we had three stories on this side of the screen, three stories of creation, we now have three Jacob stories that need to be repaired. There's the Jacob and Esau story, there's the marriage story, and there's the Terafim story. That's really what needs to be changed here, that these three stories are going to need rectification. And by the way, there was a question came out during the week, which was, how can Jacob make a statement that is then going to affect his wife? How can he sort of cause a death sentence to come upon her? I think it's a good question, but and I don't have like necessarily an amazing answer. I think it's a question that we need to pay attention to, but I think that the question itself might be answered when we come to the next stage of the analysis, which is that Jacob is also playing out a role that is not only his, but is actually a role in a bigger piece, in a bigger story. Because what I want to suggest to you tonight is actually what we need to change this diagram. Why do we need to change this diagram? I rate campus experience as wonderful. So what we're going to put into our question mark is actually that this is not just a question mark, but this is the Terafim story. But what we also need to put in here is to think that there's a difference up until now. Up until now, I've been saying essentially there's two parts to Genesis. There's the creation part. It was just very nice to review it last week. But it didn't really seem to have anything to do with what we were talking about now. And then there is the Jacob part. The Jacob part comes in three stories. It comes in the story of Jacob's marriage to Rachel. It comes in the story of goats and coats, and of Jacob and Esau, Jacob tricking Esau. It comes in the story of Jacob's marriage to Rachel, and it comes in the Terafim story. And what we're going to suggest is that these three stories, they all need redemption. But what we haven't suggested is that there any link between the left-hand side of the mind map and the right-hand side of the mind map. And what we're going to suggest tonight is actually that there is a link. That the fourth creation story is the Terafim story. That it's 1, 2, 3, and 4 creation stories. So the fourth creation story, it doesn't stop in Abraham's world, but the Terafim story is now not only the third story of the Jacob saga, but it's the fourth creation story. And we'll call it Jacob's world. So Jacob's world, or worlds, because I can't write at the moment, world is the Terafim. So therefore, if you want to start, you can start on the left-hand side of the mind map and work your way around to the Terafim through the creation stories. And you can start on the right-hand side in Jacob's world and work yourself through 3 Jacob stories. But both of them will meet their nexus, will meet their point that they are going to combine together in the Terafim story. From that Terafim story, we're then going to spread out, because what we'll need to do is find redemption for the Terafim story, which is the creation story, which is the third of the Jacob saga. Does that make sense? So Terafim is now going to expand into 2 ways. It's going to expand as the redemption of creation, and it's going to expand as the redemption of Jacob. And both of those will then play out in 2 arenas. They'll play out in the arena of Judah and Tamar, and they'll play out in the arena of Joseph and his brothers. That in both these arenas, we're going to have the replay of the 3 Jacob stories. We're going to have the replay of the 3 Jacob stories in Judah and Tamar. We're going to have the replay of the 3 Jacob stories in the story of Joseph and his brothers. And in so doing, we will also then redeem the creation story as well. Okay, if that's not, so That's the mind map that we're working towards. Does that sort of make sense? Does that sort of make sense? I'd like some feedback now. There's a map, conceptual map. Hassel, press unmute. Is it clear?
I sort of follow what you're trying to say, I think.
Okay.
Perhaps it will become clearer once you do link it into the creation story.
Yes, let's do it. Okay. Essentially, all I've done is connect the dots, right? Sometimes you have dots. Sorry, I've laid out the dots on the page. I've made no connections in terms of concepts yet. All I've said is that these are the dots. This is where we're going to go. So now let's start to make some linkages. Okay.
We looked at that link, didn't we, between the Joseph story and the...
Yeah, so what we've done is we've linked Truffim to the future. We've linked the Truffim story on to demonstrating how in the world of Joseph and his brothers, there's going to be a loss. So we've seen the echoes of the Truffim going out. It's like the long arm of Laban affecting Joseph and his brothers. What we haven't
I don't know if
yet...
it applies to anybody else, but I can only see a small diagram, not a big diagram.
There we go. Right. So what we've done, thank you, Jonathan. So sorry, yeah, it's difficult for me. So what we've seen so far, we've seen this connection across the creation stories. We have seen goats and coats connected with goats and coats, connected with goats and coats. We've seen Jacob 1 connected to Jacob 2, and possibly connected to Jacob 3. And we've seen Jacob 3 connected to goats and coats 2. What we're now going to have to see is the connection along this row down into the Truffim story, and that's going to be the first part of today. And the next connection is the Truffim into the world of Judah and Tamar. Okay. So before we do that, before we make the connection across this pathway, round the diagram from Adam's world to Noah's world to Abraham's world to Jacob's world and creation stories, and then from the Truffim story into Judah and Tamar, before we do that, I want to ask you a question. What on earth is going on? Like, why all the repetition? Why on and on and on and on? What's going on? Why is God making this repeat? It's not just a repeated text. I mean, the fact that there's a repeated text is helpful because it tells us that God wants us to see the links. It's not the repeated text, it's the repeated events. It's almost like all the different presentations we've had together over the past 2 months have been about repetition of an idea, of an idea, of an idea. Now it's changed a little bit. You know, there's a tweak there. It's no longer Abraham being the father of all humanity. It's the father of the Jewish people. Fine. It's not Abraham getting the whole world. It's Abraham getting just the land of Israel. Fine. But why? Why are we having this repeated pattern over and over again? What could that be about? And this is like a reflective question that it's amazing how we unpack the text. But what does it all mean, Basil, at the end of the day? What do you think? Why would we be having these repeated patterns over and over again? Not only Adam has a battle with it, but Noah has a battle with it, and Abraham has a battle with it, and Jacob has a battle with it, and Joseph has a battle with it, and Judah has a battle with it. Why?
Yeah.
Hello, Father.
I say, just to... Isn't this the way you plant seeds? God had to put seeds in the ground. And if you repeat the seeds, if you put a lot of them in, you're going to get a big fat tree at the end of it. And this is what he's going toward. So
I take that. I take that if thanks, Dad. I take that if the seeds were bearing fruit. I'd say that if the seeds were bearing fruit, but they don't seem to be bearing fruit. What seems to be happening is that every time there's a mistake, every time there's a failing, that Adam fails and Noah fails and the Tower of Babel fails and Abraham seems to fail somewhat, and Jacob seems to fail. So it's not like, it doesn't seem that they are laying the seeds for some amazing outcome. Instead, they seem to be dealing in quite a fragile way with the same issue over and over again, but maybe not really quite making it.
Isn't it showing the fallibility of mankind? And we haven't changed.
Okay, so that is a good option as well, Anthony, and a lovely bid. But what I then the problem with the problem with that answer is that if it's just about fallibility, so then there's no end to this. There's no end, and there must be some way to end this. There must be some redemptive quality. There must be some reason that we're moving towards something. So it's almost like we need to combine. My father's answer says it's all about building something fantastic, but it doesn't seem like they're building all the time. And Anthony's answer seems that they're failing all the time and they're not getting anywhere. So then that doesn't seem to be the right answer either, because there's no destination then.
We're waiting for Mashiach.
Okay. Don't put the Messiah all the way out there. There has to be something along the way. Stephen.
Is it something about the generations paying for what the forefathers did? The sins of one generation can materialize quite a few generations down.
So maybe reframe it not about sins, but reframe it about challenges. Go on, Rena.
Is it about teaching us something, teaching us a lesson, teaching us what's right and what's wrong?
Yes, I think all your answers are coming together now. And here, Simon.
There's definitely something fundamental about the relationship between Jacob and Esau, which is requires reconciliation and redemption in order for the Messiah to come. But you'd have to help me fathom it out.
Okay. So I'm going to take all your answers and I'm going to say like this. And I'm going to just put it into a very into a sort of like a lived experience, realm. Many of us, I would imagine, if you ask yourself, what's your challenge? What's your challenge? So you could close your eyes and you could probably think to one core issue that has possibly dogged your life, or dogged, I don't know, your religious experience, your personal experience, your relationship experience, dogged your emotional world, dogged your cognitive world. It has been something that has been there for a very long time. And that's the issue, and it comes up in many different ways. It expresses itself in my interpersonal relationships. It expresses itself in my professional world. It expresses itself in all different sort of areas, and I have to just be really mindful of it. And if I don't get on top of it, and if I don't sort of redeem that issue, whatever the reason that issue is there for, so then it will come out somewhere else, and it will come out somewhere else, and it will come out somewhere else, until finally I'm able to sort of deal with it and actually process it, and then redeem it and solve it on some level. So that was a very abstract sort of statement. So let's imagine someone had, for whatever reason, a belief about their own lack of lovability. They, for whatever reason, were brought up or were very sensitive to the notion of being unlovable. So then that might express itself in their first romantic relationships as a great neediness for reassurance that their partner loves them. It might express itself in their professional relationships as the need to sort of suck up to managers. It might express itself in their relationship with their children as an overabundance of love, because they don't feel that they feel they have to compensate. And this can carry on and carry on and carry on until it gets to a head where they need to actually manage the fundamental issue that they don't believe that they're lovable. So if you say that is what we all have as an experience, let's go back now to creation, where we're dealing with, at its heart, the frailties of created beings who are given so much power, but for whom that power can become used inappropriately when they detach it from its source. And this is a fundamental challenge that will replay itself from generation to generation to generation in new ways, because it will be somewhat dealt with, but it will be somewhat left behind. So Adam deals with it on one level, but it's left behind for the next generation to pick up the pieces of what does it mean to be a created individual with creative power, but where that creative power can get detached from its source. And so Noah takes that on. Noah takes on that challenge. And maybe Noah could solve it. We don't know. Noah doesn't know. In hindsight, we know that Noah's not able to do it, and that the generation of the tower is not able to do it. They think it's about their legacy, not about someone else's legacy. That's hindsight. But within the context of Noah, right? You put yourself in Russell Crowe's footsteps as he's acting alongside whoever it was in the most horrible movie ever. So you put yourself in his eyes and you think, I'm Noah. So he really could redeem Adam. He really could be the end of this process, and he's not. And so God passes on that next challenge to the next generation in a new iteration. It's the same idea. It's dealt with in a different way. It's expressed in a different context. Now, Abraham is going to have to also deal with what it means to be a creative individual, managing his legacy. And then does Abraham manage it? Maybe not. Maybe there's a breakdown in Abraham's family, whereby that also needs to be dealt with again. And maybe it's now about family relationships, my creativity, my responsibility within a family. And then that's Jacob and Esau. And once again, now that needs to be redeemed. And so we see that actually the same issue is reverberating across the generations, because someone's going to have to hold on to it and fix it. So you might have seen the film Groundhog Day. You know, from Groundhog Day? So like he wakes up every day to the weatherman wakes up every day to the same day until he can fix it and until he can actually sort out the day the way it's meant to be. So this is biblical Groundhog Day across the entire book of Genesis, whereby there is an issue that is being played out in each generation, the same maybe fundamental core themes that are being struggled with, that are being grappled with, but in a different context. And so it's not until we get to the end of the book of Genesis that we learn and learn and learn from all those failures and all those mistakes, until one person is able to pick it all up and do something different and not repeat the same failures of the past. And so that will be Judah and that will be Joseph at the end of those two tracks that we saw at the bottom of the mind map. So that's what we're going to be working towards over the next couple of weeks, is seeing how we can relearn this. Rena, did you have a point? Okay, sorry. So when people unmute themselves, I I think they want to. Fine, maybe you just unmuted from before. So I left you with the tantalizing suggestion that the Trophim is a creation story. Why is the Trophim a creation story? So let's have a look at the Trophim story one more time. One second. Just going to my notes. Okay. I want to just have a look at the Trophim story inside. So we're going to pull up Safaria and find the Trophim story, which is going to be fine. Here we go. We are in Genesis. Anyone help me with the chapter? 33 maybe? A little bit earlier, 32. Okay, a little bit earlier than that, maybe. There we are. Okay, so let me share my screen with you and we'll put some text up. Let's start to look at the comparisons between the Trophim story on the one hand and the Genesis stories on the other. Okay, so it starts over here. Lavan halach ligozet sono, ligzozet sono. Lavan had gone to shear his sheep. Vatignev Rachel as a Trophim, Ashela Avil. And Rachel steals the Trophim, steals the household idols, the divining instruments. We'll call them divining fetishes, or the crystal ball. She steals the crystal ball that her father had. When else does a daughter take something that of her father's? When else does a daughter take something of her father's? Anyone? There's another time in Genesis that a daughter takes something of her father's.
Is it to do with Tamar stealing the coat?
So Tamar is it's not going to be something that's happening in the future. It's going to be something that happens in the past. And Tamar doesn't steal necessarily. She's trying to hold out the coat. But we will bring back Tamar a little bit later on. But I'm thinking a little bit earlier in the book of Genesis. There's a daughter or someone who has a father, and she takes something that her father doesn't want her to take.
You're talking about Eve taking the apple, or is that too far a stretch?
Fantastic. So Eve takes a fruit from the tree of knowledge. She takes it from whose tree is it? It's God's tree. It's her dad's tree, her father's tree. So let's see some more. That's interesting, isn't it? So Jacob kept Laban the Aramean in the dark, not telling him that he was fleeing. He flees away, and he goes to look at the mountain of Gilad, and we already looked at the symbolism of Gilad, that is the place where there's the Gal Aid, the mountain of stones, the mound of stones, and there is also the place that the merchants who are coming to buy Joseph will be coming from. It's like that was what we saw, the prospective nature of the Teraphim story, that it's going to now come and affect the descendants of Rachel, but we're running away of ourselves. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. By the way, we're going to go back and we're going to read these verses later on. We're going to see not only connections forward to the death, to the loss of Joseph, we'll also see connections forward to the Judah and Tamar story. Right now, we're looking for connections backward to creation. So he took his kinsman with him, and he pursued him with a distance of 7 days. It's interesting. It talks about 7 days. In the creation story, there's a Shabbat-like event. Is there a significance to the number 7 when it comes to the Teraphim story? Is there a significance to the number 7 when it comes to the Teraphim story? Other than the fact that it's 7 days away, have you ever? Is there another 7 days that's involved in the relationship between Jacob and Rachel, or Jacob and Leah, Jacob and Laban? Is there a 7?
7 years.
7 years, that's right. So Jacob works for 7 years. But here it's a bit strange because it's 7 years, but it's the opposite way round. So normally you'd have 6 years and then a day of Sabbath, whereas for Laban, it's the perversion. It's 7 years. But despite it being 7 years, there's an interesting language which describes how Jacob works for his father-in-law. So just to get a little bit of an earlier piece of text, jumping out of this one and walking forwards, there's a very romantic line, but it doesn't seem necessarily so romantic in this context. So that Rachel comes, and then they have a discussion about Jacob wants to marry Rachel, and there's a discussion. I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. I'm going to give you 7 years of my work. So. And Laban says, it's better to give her to you than giving her to someone else. Shavah imadi, stay with me. Shavah imadi, stay with me. Now, what does Shavah imadi sound like? Stay with me during these 7 years. Shavah sounds like Shabbat. Have a Shabbat with me. Except that this is the opposite of Shabbat, because what's he doing during these 7 years? Yeah, he's working. That's right, Stephen. He's working hard.
How could you hear me? I was on mute.
I saw you mouth it, Stephen. But isn't that? But by the way, isn't that great when you get so into it that you just like, yeah, you want to say it. So by the way, this is how I feel about text these days. You know, when you start to learn these things, you start to see these connections. It's massively exciting. So he says it's better to give it to her, to give to you, than to give to someone else. Stay with me, have a Shabbat with me, but it's a perversion of Shabbat. It's 7 years rather than 7 days, and it's 7 years of toil rather than 7 years of relaxation. However, for Jacob, Jacob worked for Rachel for 7 years. But for him, it was like 1 day. Because he loved her so much. Why does the Torah say that it's like 1 day? What we're being told. But Jacob himself has had a Shabbat-like experience, because for him, he's doing it out of love. For him, the 7 years is contracted into 1 day. It's actually the opposite. It's not 7 years of toil. It is 7 years of Shabbat because it's out of love. Okay, so going back to the actual conversation in the stealing of the Truffim. So V'yavo Elohim el Lavan ha'arim b'chalom halayla. Laban the Aramean comes in a dream. God appears to Laban in a dream. And he says to him, Shisham elecha, be careful, pen to daber im Yaakov mitov ad ra, lest you speak with Jacob from good to bad, from tov ad ra to bad. There's only one other place in Genesis we've ever seen that connection of the words tov and ra, of good and bad. What's that?
Blessing and a curse in a way, but
No, the trees of good and evil.
Trees of good and evil. Eitz havdas bein tov l'ra, the tree of knowledge between good and evil. So the only other time in the entirety of the book of Bereshit that we've seen this words together, the juxtaposition of good and bad, is the tree of knowledge between good and evil. So far we've got a Shabbat-like event of 7 years. It's twisted, it's inverted by Laban, but it's a Shabbat-like event. Jacob seems to put it back into its day form with his love. We've got a tree of good and evil. We've got a daughter taking something that the father's not given permission. Let's see what other connections we have to the creation story. So Vayaseg Lavan es Yaakov. Laban overtook Jacob. Yaakov takas ahaloi. Jacob had pitched his tent Bahar on the mountain. Lavan takas es echad Bahar Gilad, and they get to the hill country of Gilad. Lavan Yaakov. Me asisa, what did you do? Vatignov es levavi, and you stole my heart. V'tanaheg es benosi kshvuyes chorev, and you're treating my daughters like captured ones of the sword. Lama nachbeisa livrach. Why did you run away? Nachbeisa, hidden. Why did you hide yourselves away? Lama nachbeisa. That's right. So why? Don't worry, Rena. So what's interesting about this word nachbeisa, to hide oneself away? There's only one other time in Genesis that we've seen the word of hiding of achave in this form. Who hides? Pardon?
Adam and Eve.
Cain and Abel.
This one is not Cain and Abel, but you're right, it's Adam and Eve. Where do they hide? Let's go back.
Well,
After eating the apple.
That's right, after eating of the tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, so God says, this is the story of the snake in chapter 3. And he says, Vayome es kolacha shamati bagan. God, I heard the sound of you in the garden. Va'ira, and I was afraid. Ki orem anochi, because I was naked. Ve'echavei, so I hid. This is the only time that another time in the book of Genesis that we see this language of hiding is when Adam says, I'm hiding from you, God, because I'm scared of you. Oh, you're scared. That's an interesting thing, because what does Jacob say back? Jacob says, one second. I'll show you in a second. So Jacob will say, I was scared. But why did you hide yourselves away? And you stole me away. And you didn't tell me you were going, and I couldn't send you off with all the beautiful festive music. And you didn't give me a chance to kiss my sons and my daughters. It was a horrible thing that you did. Okay. Yesh le'el yod. I have it in my power to do you harm. Right? But the God of your father, he's come to me yesterday and he said to me, be careful, lest you do mitov ad ra, lest you do something from good to bad. Lest you do, and again, that good and bad, that's the only other connection we have the only other time we have those connections other than reference to Jacob and Laban is back into the creation story of the world. So very well, you had to leave because you're longing for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? And Yaakov says, Ki yaresi, because I was scared. I was scared. That's why I hid. I was scared. Oh, isn't that interesting? Isn't that what Adam said in Genesis 3? He says, and I was scared. Ah, okay. So one second. So that's another connection, isn't it? Okay. So then come the fateful words. The person for whom your gods are found with, so they won't live. Okay, and he didn't know that Rachel had stolen them. So they go through and they search through the different tents. Laban makes 3 different searches. He goes into the tent of Jacob, into the tent of Leah, into the tent of the two maid servants, and he doesn't find them. And then he comes out and he goes into the tent of Rachel. And Rachel had taken the trophim and she put them into the saddle pack of her camel, and she was sitting on them. And Laban's looking around and he can't find them. And she says to her father, so sorry that I can't get up, because the way of women is upon me. And he searches around and he doesn't find the trophim. Okay. So now Jacob gets really upset and he says to him, so what is my crime? What is my guilt that you should pursue me? You've rummaged through everything and you haven't found it. Look, he says, these 20 years I worked for you. I worked hard for you. One second. I made myself, I'm just going to show you, he said, I worked for you really, really hard. I worked really, really hard. Where else do we have a curse on a child after a perceived infringement, or after an infringement, whereby you have to work really hard?
Adam.
Curse of Adam to
right. That's the curse on Adam. He's going to have to work the ground really hard. He says, these 20 years, rechelecha lo shikelu. Your rochels, your ewes, your she-goats or she-sheep, lo shikelu. They never miscarried. Rechelecha lo shikelu. Your rochels didn't miscarry. What would be the opposite of that? That your rochel does miscarry. What's the curse that is given to Eve after she has to leave the garden?
That she will suffer in childbirth.
She will suffer in childbirth. Here, Jacob says, your she-goats, they didn't miscarry. Wouldn't it have been better, actually, if Rachel had miscarried? If she'd miscarried with Benjamin? Because if she miscarried with Benjamin, then she wouldn't have fallen foul of the curse of Eve. What's the curse of Eve? The curse of Eve is that you're going to have pain in childbirth, that childbirth is going to be precarious. They're going to be dangerous and precarious, that you could hemorrhage out. Jacob, unbeknownst to him, is hinting between the lines, your rochels never, he's saying to his father-in-law, your rochels never miscarried. Instead, they had childbirth. Wouldn't it have been better if Rachel didn't have childbirth with Benjamin? She would have miscarried. She wouldn't have died. Yes, you wouldn't have had a Benjamin, but you wouldn't have had a dead Rachel. And so, by the way, that's coming to sort of answer your question, Jonathan, that if this is a replay of the creation story, here Jacob is being used as a tool to bring about that curse once again. He's already said, whoever has these teraphim shall not live, and now he's focusing, how is that death going to come about? It's going to come about through the curses of creation. They will once again come around to cause his wife to lose her life in childbirth.
This, if I can just ask a quick question, this isn't actually a creation story in the same way the other 3 were. This is just linkages between this passage and Bereshis.
Right, so we have to work out what is the novelty. We have to work out 2 things. What's the novelty? What's the creativity that is being promised to Jacob? But we could get there in a second. And I'll give you a clue, actually. We'll just not jump to that. The creativity that's been given to Jacob. When is Jacob promised something in the context of his bigger package, Jacob 1, 2, and 3, when is he promised something that is going to give him the powers of creativity?
Isn't it when he gets after the fight with the angel, and he gets his name changed, and the promises made to him are there?
Right, and the fight with the angel was when Jacob met angels for a second time. But Jacob also met angels for a first time. When did he meet angels for a first time?
The ladder story.
The ladder story, that's right, the ladder story. The very first time we see almost Jacob as separating out from the parents, removing himself from the brother story. He's now going to his father-in-law Laban, and he has the vision of the ladder, and there he's promised that he's going to have this land that he's sleeping on is going to be his, and his progeny are going to fill it. So he is given a certain creation account. He is given another role in the progression of creation. You sometimes have to wonder, all these promises were made to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, but what's the difference across them? So maybe there's a renewal of that promise, but actually a shift in that promise, and the fact that it's going to Jacob now. We have to work out what that is, but that might start to answer your question, Jonathan, at least another dot on the in terms of the dots that we're trying to join together. The second thing is, what's the temptation in this story? Where is there the temptation? We've spoken about linguistic connections, but remember we said that every creation account has three parts. It's got creation, it's got temptation, and it's got Shabbat. And so we're going to have to find out where are those three elements seemingly in this creation story, in this fourth creation story. Okay. But I'm just going to move you on to the final part of the creation story, which was, what's the final component, which is that the garden will be guarded. The garden will be sealed off. We're going to have a covenant. Well, there is a covenant that is made between Laban and Jacob. And the covenant, as we go a little bit further down, is here in verse 34. Come then, let us make a pact, you and I, that there may be a witness between you and me. Thereupon Jacob took a stone and set it on a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. They took stones and made a mound, and they partook of a meal there by the mound. They made a gal, they made a mound of stones, a gal aid, a mound that will be testimony. This mound is a witness between you and me this day, and that's why they named it gal aid. And the Lord is going to watch between you and me, that when we're out of sight of each other, that this is sort of like Laban and Jacob saying, we're going to shut this situation off from the rest. We're going to make a covenant. That sounds like a Shabbat-like event almost. Shabbat-like event where we're shutting something off, just as the angels with the rotating sword shut off the garden. We're going to make a gal aid, some sort of closure on this moment. The problem is they're making closure on a moment that is going to destroy the life of Rachel. We're making a testimony to the ongoing nature of this story, that this story will now repeat. We're going to have Groundhog Day once again. We're going to have Groundhog Day as a mashup of creativity, the creation stories, mixing with the Jacob story and all the different sensitivities and barriers that Jacob has faced. And now they're going to split off that mashup and replay in the story of the two main sort of sons of Jacob, Judah as king and Joseph as firstborn of the beloved wife. Okay. How are we feeling? You ready to take it to the next level? So let's just review. They are hiding. They are scared. There's good and bad. There is someone who's stolen something from a parent, a daughter stolen something from a parent. There are so many crazy parallels. There's the miscarriage as a curse and the difficulty in childbirth. There is the difficulty in working the ground. There are all these connections. But we need a little bit more. And I think that's what Jonathan was feeling out, is that where's all the creativity? Where's all that creativity? And so we said, where was the creativity? That there was a Shabbat-like event. There's a 7 years. 1 second. Just look at my notes. Fine. The question is, what do we do with this? What do we do with this? What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to see how this story now resonates in the future stories. We're going to have to see how Teraphim, how Jacob's life, the goats and coats story, the Jacob meeting Rachel story, and the Teraphim story plays out in Judah and Tamar and plays out in Joseph and his brothers. Because by doing that, we will start to then flesh out what all these things represent. So let's just begin that tonight. And let's begin by looking at Yehuda and Tamar. What is the main question you might have when it comes to Yehuda and Tamar? We saw it in last week's parasha. We just read it on Shabbat. What is the main question that you come to? What are your main questions when you come to this story? Sorry, I'm just going to...
about why it was there. It's in a very, seems to come at a very odd time.
Great. So Stephen's already jumped right into why is it there, which is a fantastic question. And I think that is the question. You know, sometimes people get bothered by Yehud and Tamar. What's Judah? He's the future king of Israel. What's he doing, propositioning a harlot on the way? That's a question. And it's not a bad question, but I think a more interesting question is, what on earth is it doing in the story? What does it add to the Joseph narrative? So if you imagine that you've got this whole line, you've got Abraham, you've got Isaac, you've got Jacob, and then you've got the brothers, and then you've got the sale of Joseph, and in the middle of that whole Joseph narrative, Andrew Lloyd Webber didn't make it have the cut. So we have this Judah and Tamar story. What's it doing there? Do you know who asked that question? Rashi asks that question. Let me show you the Rashi on that question. Just before we do, I want to just also share with you exactly what we've done tonight and where we're going next, because I feel like I want to make sure we're on the same page. And I can't find my screen. Show what it is. Here it is. Okay. I'm just trying to find. Here we are. Can you see my page now? Yeah, we're back in the text. So just to show you from the diagrammatic point of what we've done today.
You seem to be sharing an Explorer screen rather than a Chrome screen.
Okay, let's try that again. New share. There we go. Is that better? Right, so here what we've done so far tonight. What we've done so far tonight is, in big, we've explored how Adam's world is linked to Jacob's world. We've shown some very spooky connections to show that not only does the world of the Teraphim seek to provide the denouement to Jacob's story, Jacob 1, Jacob 2, Jacob 3, but also it provides a denouement to the creation account. The next thing that we did, and we showed that, we demonstrated that inside. We then made the suggestion, the radical suggestion, that this Teraphim story will now splinter off to find redemption in a Groundhog Day-like manner in the story of Joseph and his brothers and the story of Judah and Tamar. So, and what we're going to suggest is that rather than trying to understand directly all the linkages that we've just made between Adam's world and Jacob's world, it might be better to see how they get replayed and redeemed in the Judah and Tamar story, and in so doing shed light on what was going on in the Teraphim. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the Judah and Tamar story, and we're going to find in the Judah and Tamar story echoes of Jacob 1, echoes of Jacob 2, and echoes of Jacob 3. Echoes of goats and coats, which we've seen already a little bit, echoes of Jacob's marriage to Rachel, and echoes of the Teraphim. Once we see how Teraphim are expressed in Judah and Tamar, we'll see what Rachel was trying to do, and we'll see how they are redeemed by Judah and Tamar. So that's what we're going to do this week for the next 5 minutes of next week. And then, or we might even just start it next week. And then what we're going to do the following week will be to see how the Joseph and his brothers story has echoes of goats and coats 1, has echoes of Jacob's marriage to Rachel, has echoes of the Teraphim story, and then how these two meet up. And finally, we'll have the nexus, the final point, whereby we do redeem this flow. We do grapple with the issue and manage it. And it will be in the meeting between Judah on the one hand and Joseph on the other. Okay. Do you know what I'm going to say tonight is, let's leave it and on that cliffhanger. Let's leave it at that point. Let's say that next time we're going to jump straight in to seeing how Judah and Tamar has all these three elements in, with an intention to try and working out what is the depth of the Teraphim story. And I'll leave you maybe just with one idea, because we've got 5 more minutes. I want to leave you with one idea to use up all my time, which is, we talked last time about what was it about creation that is so tricky. What is it about moving to a world of good and bad that becomes the litmus test of my integrity? And we said the difference between the world pre-eating from the tree of knowledge and post-eating from the tree of knowledge is the difference as to how I internalize truth or how I internalize value. And so the example was, imagine you're driving one night to go and pick up a takeaway from Edgware, and you back your old banger into some Porsche 911 behind you. If you remember that, and you convince yourself somehow with all sorts of elaborate mind tricks that really it's a good thing not to leave a note. That somehow you take all that independence that you're given and all that, and you twist it such that morality now becomes turned and broken. It's almost like you're being too hasty with your own subjectivity. And that seems to be a tension that we're seeing throughout this book. That there is a point where people take matters into their own hands slightly too hastily. Eve wants and Adam want to have that challenge of having to push themselves to connect to God, even in a world of subjectivity. Slightly too hasty, guys. Slightly too hasty because God said no. Noah wants to demonstrate some sort of ecstatic devotion to God in the world of his productivity, or the Tower of Babel wants to demonstrate their own legacy. Slightly too hasty, guys, because you're detaching it from God. Abraham is promised he's going to have progeny, that he's going to have a legacy, and his wife is barren. And so there's all sorts of schemes. Will it be Lot? Will it be Hagar? How's it going to work out? This woman, Sarah, she can't have children. And so they jump the gun. Slightly too hasty, guys. Jacob and Rebekah are troubled by the fact that the birthright should be going to Jacob. I mean, he's bought it, hasn't he? And Esau has denigrated it. And so they concoct a scheme. The scheme was meant to activate Jacob. Jacob couldn't be activated. Instead, he created a deception. Slightly too hasty, Jacob. Rachel wants to stop her father, Laban, from thwarting the plans of the Jewish people. We read in the Haggadah, Lavan intended to uproot everything. Why did Lavan intend to uproot everything? What did Lavan want to do? All he wanted to do was hug his children. No. If you look in the text, Lavan says, these children are mine. They're all mine. Why does Lavan say these children are mine? Because Laban really believes that the deal wasn't that Jacob would take his daughters and make them now part of the Jacob company, rather that Jacob would be absorbed into the Laban company. That's what he thought. And that's why there's the whole discussion. What's going to be my payment? What's going to be my reward? They're asking about Nakva. They're asking about, there seems to be like they're discussing which lambs will you get, but really they're asking which daughters will you get? It seems like there's a tension here. Laban says I want to assimilate the Jewish people, and Jacob needs to detach. In that process of thwarting the plans of Jacob, there's someone who acts too hastily, who wants to take away his crystal ball, who wants to take matters into her own hands. And it's Rachel. In the Judah story, there's a hastiness, but the hastiness is now with, again, where there's a lady who wants to perpetuate the legacy of her dead husbands. That's Tamar. And she needs to take matters into her own hands. And it could all end up, again, with tragedy. It could all end up with tragedy because she could be put to death. And it's not only her who's going to be put to death. It's going to be her twins, the twins in her belly, that are put to death. Tamar's twins are put to death, which means that Judah's children, he's killing his children, which means that he won't be able to have the forebear of the Messiah. That's the messianic part there, Simon. And yet Judah stops it. Well, how does he stop it? Because he says, it was me that made her hasty. It was my role in withholding my son Shelah from her that made her act. I recognize my part in this story. And that seems to be the point where things start to go right again. Just as Jacob could have exited this cycle when he stood up and said, I've learned from the mistakes of the past. I'm not going to be bent anymore and crooked. I'm going to be straightforward and upright. So too Judah does that, but does that in a way that there's no further repercussions. Judah is the one that can be modern, that can admit, that can offer his admission to his role in this story. And it's there that the hastiness is met by responsibility. And we go back all the way to the garden story. The garden story was all about not just that the fact that they sinned, but what does Eve say? It wasn't me, it was the snake. The snake made me do it. No, Adam says it wasn't me, it was my wife. Eve says it wasn't me, it was the snake. They're constantly passing the buck. And so that's finally brought to its redemption when Judah says, you know what? It was me. Let's see the connections next week in the Judah and Tamar story, and the week afterwards in the brothers story. Thank you very much for chasing away the lullabies with me tonight. A real pleasure to see you all. Mazel tov Rina for tomorrow. and see you next week for more Chasing Lullabies. Any thoughts, questions, or comments, please, please, please.